"If we lose this deal," Desmond whispered, "you'll be back translating restaurant menus." Elias didn't look at him, didn't flinch, just kept his eyes locked on Mr. Kurosawa across the table, Kurotech's COO, who was calmly stirring his tea like it held the fate of the world. Because, in a way, it did. 12 men in tailored charcoal suits sat along the lacquered conference table in Orbistech's Shanghai office, hadn't blinked since Desmond barged in 15 minutes late, reeking of Palo Alto arrogance and sandalwood cologne. The man thought charm was volume, and that negotiations could be bulldozed with tech-bro metaphors. He introduced himself with a wink and a joke about taking this merger to the moon. Mr. Kurosawa hadn't even acknowledged him. Elias spoke again, crisp and precise Mandarin flowing from his lips like a knife being unshathed. "Understand the importance of maintaining local operational autonomy. That clause would remain untouched." Mr. Kurosawa nodded barely. His colleagues exchanged whispers. The stakes were tectonic. A long-term logistics and AI integration deal worth $180 million over 5 years. If it fell through, Orbisk's entire Asian expansion strategy would collapse like a cheap card table in a windstorm. Elias had been living and breathing this deal for 11 months. Zoo International trusted his because he listened, because he understood. He knew that in Mandarin, silence was not weakness, it was strategy. He knew to bow slightly deeper than he had to let pauses stretch until the other party filled them, and more than anything, he knew how to shut up when it counted. Desmond, however, did not. "Let's circle back on that autonomy point," he blurted, switching to English. "Think we're giving away too much here. We've got leverage, a rustle of fabric." One of the Kuro attorneys adjusted his glasses. Mr. Kurosawa's smile flickered and died. Elias kept his voice level. "As we discussed previously." "I wasn't at the previous meeting," Desmond said. "So let's reframe it. Reframe it like it was a TED talk and not a cultural minefield where one false syllable could cost the company $250 million. Elias inhaled through his nose, slow and silent. He could smell the cheap plastic of the conference room chairs, the faint bleach of the polished table, the overpriced coffee burning in the hallway. It all reeked of corporate performance art, and Desmond was the lead clown. He turned back to the Kuro team and said in Chinese, "Let me briefly explain the context." A few of the Kuro executives relaxed visibly. One even smiled. "Good," he thought. "Let them see who's fluent and who's flailing." Desmond wouldn't stop. He leaned over to his, voice dripping with patronizing glee. "Listen, Elias, you've been doing great, as you know, the cultural liaison or whatever. But this is strategy, and that's my lane now." His pen cracked in his hand. He hadn't even realized he'd been gripping it. Elias had seen men like him his entire career. Ivy League Gloss-funded startups, a podcast about disrupting paradigms. They always underestimated him until they didn't, till the contract was signed. The ink dried and the press release went out quoting him until it was too late, but today felt different, off. There was a charge in the air like a power line about to snap. Mr. Kurosawa cleared his throat, dragging the room's attention back to center. "We were under the impression," he said in slow, deliberate English, "that Mr. Thorne was the lead on this engagement." "He was," Desmond said, cutting in, "but as of this quarter, we're making some changes. Still have full access to our leadership team." Leadership team. He meant himself. He meant he was replaceable, funnable, a tool to be discarded once the trench work was done. Elias didn't respond. He stared at the stylized Orbis Tech logo etched in the glass wall behind the Kuro delegation. It used to mean something. Global innovation, cultural fluency, precision. Now it just looked like a tombstone. Outside, across the skyline, yellow-gray haze of the Shanghai morning thickened. Below, the city roared with its usual controlled chaos, horns, scooters, rapid-fire conversations. Inside, the silence curdled. Desmond adjusted his jacket, a smug flick of his cufflink. "Shall we proceed?" he asked, clearly expecting Elias to translate. He didn't. Instead, he looked straight at Mr. Kurosawa and said, in perfect, unhurried Mandarin, "It's clear the leadership structure has changed. We take a short recess to recalibrate expectations." Mr. Kurosawa gave the faintest nod. That would be wise. As the zoo team rose, Desmond beamed like he'd just nailed a quarterly report. Elias stood slowly, gathering his folder, his jaw tight. He hadn't told anyone. Not legal, not his assistant, not even his sister. But he'd already started drawing up exit plans 3 weeks ago. A whisper from a contact at Jay, an exploratory call. "Do you ever consider?" they'd asked. He hadn't answered then. But now, after this farce, after being reduced to cultural liaison, while this overconfident frat ghost hijacked his life's work, now he had his answer. The moment it happened was so absurd, so perfectly idiotic, Elias actually thought he'd misheard him. Desmond stood up mid-sentence, his chair squealing back against the polished concrete floor like it was trying to escape the scene. We're 15 minutes into the resumed meeting after the recess, just beginning to review the amended integration clause, the one Elias had personally drafted after 6 weeks of backal talks with Kuro's legal team. And then he said it. Elias won't be continuing with Orbsta. He announced loud and clear as if reading a weather update. Effective immediately, we're undergoing strategic restructuring and his position has been sunset. Sunset not terminated, not laid off. Sunset like he was a damn PowerPoint slide being phased out for newer, shinier template. The room stilled. Mr. Kurosawa froze mid-pour, the stainless steel teapot hovering over his cup like it was caught in some surrealist painting. One of his deputies blinked 3 times fast, as if trying to decode what just came out of Desmond's mouth. Elias didn't move. His ears rang, but his face stayed blank. Not because he was composed, though he was, because his brain had immediately gone cold. Not panic, something harder. He hadn't even looked at his when he said it. Just stared across the table, talking through his like he was already erased. "Desmond," he said, his voice even, "step outside with me." He gave a smug chuckle. "No need, Elias. This is company business and I figured transparency was better. No secrets, right?" He saw it then, the little twitch in his jaw. He'd planned this, waited until the highest stakes negotiation of the year was underway, with all eyes on the table to pull the stunt, publicly humiliate him, dominance cement his control. He was the chess piece he was sacrificing for spectacle. His chair scraped back slowly as he rose. Not in a rush, not reacting. His body moved on instinct, every gesture taut with the fury he refused to show. "I see," he said, turning to the Zhu delegation. "Apologies for the disruption. This was unexpected." He slipped into Mandarin before Desmond could interject. "Please forgive this sudden development. I understand this may be concerning to your company." Kurosawa didn't reply, but he watched him, not with confusion, not with pity, with interest. Elias caught that flicker behind his eyes like he was watching not a car crash, but a metamorphosis. Desmond cleared his throat. "Let's stay on track," he said, clapping his hands together. "Got a proposal on the table." No one moved. Kurosawa raised one hand slowly like a conductor calling silence. Then he spoke to Elias, not to Desmond. "May I ask," he said in Mandarin, tone light but laced with precision, "what your next role will be?" The breath in the room shifted. Desmond's brow furrowed. He didn't understand the words, but he understood he was no longer in control. Elias met Kurosawa's gaze and felt a strange calm settle in his bones. Kind you feel after the storm has already taken your roof. When you realize all that's left is what you choose to rebuild. He adjusted his blazer, tilted his chin just slightly. "I haven't decided yet," he said in Mandarin, his voice low and certain. "But I'm open to new partnerships." The Kuro team glanced among themselves. Desmond, still clueless, tried to redirect. "Listen, we can translate later. Let's focus on the deal." But the room was no longer his. Kurosawa stood slow and deliberate and addressed his colleagues with a single word. "Goodbye. Break." They rose in unison, leaving their folders untouched. Mr. Kurosawa lingered just long enough to glance back at Elias and offer the barest nod. Respect, not sympathy. As they filed out, Desmond turned to him, voice low and triumphant. "You should have seen this coming. You were overpaid and overhyped." Elias looked at him then, not angry, not broken, but clear. "Just fired your only translator, cultural bridge, and the architect of this entire deal," he said. "All to prove you have a dick," he snorted. "Enjoy job hunting." He smiled faintly. "I already got an offer, Desmond, 3 weeks ago. I turned it down." He paused. His smile flickered. He stepped forward, leaned in. "I think I'm going to accept it now." The door had barely clicked shut behind the Zhu delegation before Desmond started talking again. Fast, loud, trying to fill the space like a man scooping water from a sinking boat with his bare hands. "Let's get ahead of this. I'll have legal draft a statement, loop in PR, maybe frame it as a transition we'd been planning. Elias, I'll even let you." "You're not in the room anymore, Desmond." Elias didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to. His words landed like a pin drop in a cathedral. He froze. That same twitch in his jaw came back. He hadn't quite wrapped his skull around the idea that he wasn't going to cry or beg or storm out in a blaze of HR emails. He just stood there, still in his seat, calm hands folded neatly over the contract draft like it was Sunday tea. "I don't think you get to decide that," he said finally, stepping closer. "Oh, but I do," he replied, standing. "Because in exactly 60 seconds this room will not belong to Orbis Tech anymore." Then the door opened. Mr. Kurosawa returned alone. No assistants, no translator. He looked at Elias, not Desmond. Then in Mandarin he said, "Would you be willing to continue the discussion independently?" Elias didn't miss a beat. "Yes, absolutely. I'd be delighted." There was a pause. Kurosawa looked over his shoulder at Desmond, whose mouth had just parted to protest. Kurosawa raised one hand. "I would appreciate it," he said, till in Mandarin, slow and formal, if Orbis Tech's representatives could give us the room. It wasn't a request. It was a surgical strike in silk wrapping. Desmond hesitated. "I'm sorry, we're still the Mr. Kurosawa's eyebrow arched. The contractual relationship appears undefined at the moment." A beat, and then, like a man suddenly aware he'd stepped onto a frozen lake that was cracking beneath him, Desmond stepped back. "Fine," he snapped. "But this isn't over." "You're right," Elias replied without looking at him. "It's just beginning." Desmond lingered at the door for a second too long, then vanished like a bad smell into the hallway. Silence returned. Kurosawa sat down across from him. Elias didn't speak right away. He let the air settle, let the moment breathe. Then, as if flipping a mental switch, he slipped back into Mandarin with ease and elegance. "The proposal still stands," he said, turning the folder to face him. "With one change, my title." Opened the folder and pulled out a clean sheet of paper. No Orbit Tech logo, no watermark. "I'm now operating as an independent consultant. All the terms remain intact. My compensation would shift to a success-based model. 10% payable upon contract execution." He pushed the paper forward with a manicured finger. Kurosawa's mouth twitched. Not a smile, something deeper. Recognition. "You already had this ready?" He allowed himself the softest smirk. "Say, I've been prepared." He nodded once. The man who'd said maybe many zero words the entire week of negotiations suddenly unfolded his arms and leaned in. For the next hour, they talked, really talked about supply chain integrations, hybrid AI licensing models, joint logistics planning, about the cultural philosophy behind Kuro's decentralized hierarchy, about the ways Orbis Tech had been fumbling the trust they'd once built, trying to treat China like an expansion instead of a collaboration. Elias spoke the language, not just Mandarin, but their language. The unsaid language, the pauses, the subtext, the difference that came not from weakness but from respect, and Lang noticed. They all had. By the time his deputies returned, Elias had redlined the contract, noted 3 adjustments Zhu had quietly hoped for but never dared request from Orbstech, suggested a phased rollout schedule that would give Kuro more leverage with their regional partners. Mr. Liang stood and extended his hand. "This," he said in Mandarin, "is how business is meant to be done." Elias shook it, not with relief, not with pride, but with quiet power, because the moment he'd crossed that line, stood his ground, claimed his value, and shed the dying skin of Orbistech wasn't an act of survival. It was a declaration of war. Morning after the negotiation, Orbistech released a statement so generic it could have been copy-pasted from a toothpaste recall. "We thank Elias Thorne for his contributions and wish him success in future endeavors. As part of our global restructuring initiative, Orbis Tech remains committed to excellence in international partnerships." Commitment, apparently, how came in the form of a slapped-together task force of underqualified yes-men and a hastily hired Mandarin interpreter who pronounced "gu" like it rhymed with nacho cheese. Elias read the press release on his phone while sipping oolong in the corner booth of a dim tea house in Kuro Hui. He scrolled past the LinkedIn vultures, already liking Desmond's post about leaning into disruption and navigating difficult transitions. He didn't comment, he didn't repost, just quietly filed the whole thing into a folder, in his mind labeled fodder for later. What no one at Orbis Tech knew, not PR, not legal, not even Desmond, was that Elias was already on his second meeting that day with Kuro's legal team. The contract they signed wasn't with Elias Thorne. It was with RC Global Partners Limited, a Singapore-registered entity that had existed on paper for less than 72 hours. Shell brand, no press, no traceable ties, just a P.O. box, a burner phone, and a sleek black and white logo designed by a freelancer in Prague. The only web presence was a minimalist one-page site that read, "Precision in chaos, global in reach, quiet by design." It was a shell, yes, but it was his. And behind that shell, the work had already begun. Flashback 6 months ago. Zhu had first floated the idea in a hallway during a tech summit in Chengdu. Mr. Kurosawa, rare glass of beer in hand, had leaned in and said, "If you ever want to build something of your own, we'd invest." He laughed, then told him he was loyal to Orbistech, that he liked the challenge of corporate politics. His reply, "A challenge is only noble if it's winnable." He hadn't realized how unwinnable it had become until Desmond waltzed in with his startup stink and sunset strategy. Now RC Global wasn't just a consulting firm. It was a scalpel. JW International was his first patient. They moved quickly. No formal announcement, no press release, just quiet red lines, revised strategies, back-channel memos. Every email came from a burner account, every invoice from a shadow payment platform. Meanwhile, Orbis Tech spiraled into spin mode. Desmond held emergency Zooms with their remaining APAC clients, mispronouncing names and overpromising deliverables. He tried to replace Elias's years of trust building with a new PowerPoint deck and a 3-day cultural sensitivity seminar. It didn't go well. Clients didn't say no. They just went quiet, missed meetings, delayed signatures. One by one, they began drifting like marbles rolling away from a broken bowl. Elias didn't poach. He didn't need to, he whispered. He emailed one former client a link to a white paper he happened to write that solved a painoid Orbis had ignored for years. He sent another a polite note in Japanese, mentioning that a new firm specializing in adaptive market entry had recently become available. He knew every pressure point, every weakness in Orbis Tech's portfolio. He'd built the damn thing. And so he began unbuilding it, not loudly, not with lawsuits or headlines, but quietly, thought, like erosion. Each client he lured away became another stitch in the skin of RC Global. Kuro funded his retainer and made introductions. A German logistics firm asked him to audit Orbit's AI framework. A Singapore startup offered him equity for help navigating China's export law. Elias operated like a ghost. No social media, no office, just encrypted calls at midnight, signal chats with CEOs, long walks through parks where no one could overhear. Every time he passed an Orbis Tech ad in the airport or heard Desmond's smug voice on a conference panel, he smiled. Not because he missed it, but because he was turning their kingdom into his quarry, brick by brick, deal by deal, name by name. And no one, not Desmond, not legal, not even his old assistant, had the slightest clue. Yet, the first sign of panic came in the form of calendar invite. Object: urgent Jew account transition, call mandatory attendance sent by Desmond's executive assistant at 3:14 a.m. East Coast time. It hid in boxes like a silent scream. At 9 a.m. sharp, 7 Orbit Tech execs logged into the call, bags under their eyes, ties crooked, sipping coffee like it was morphine. Desmond joined last, sweaty and overdressed in an aggressively blue blazer, trying to mask desperation with corporate cheer. "All right," Team said, flashing a grin like a chipped veneer. "Let's get ahead of this narrative." But there was no narrative to get ahead of, because Zoo International wasn't returning their calls. Not to confirm a meeting, not to clarify timelines, not even to reject anything, just static. Desmond had already assigned a replacement for Elias, someone from the London office named Laura Beasley, who spoke fluent French but could barely pronounce ni hao. Introduced herself in an email chain you didn't acknowledge. He followed up twice, then 3 times, then stopped entirely. Desmond called Kurosawa's assistant directly. The call was sent to voicemail. He pinged Kuro's business development lead on WeChat, left on read. He emailed their in-house legal. The message bounced back. Recipient has left the organization. Desmond didn't know it yet, but Jay was gone. They had simply left the building without slamming the door, without a note, without a word. Meanwhile, Elias was in a rooftop bar in Singapore, redlining an expansion agreement with Kuro Southeast Asia Partners while sipping a Lucci cocktail and listening to a jazz cover of Smells Like Teen Spirit. Every time his phone vibrated, it was a new whisper. A Shanghai AI startup that used to be tight with Orbis Tech wanted an exploratory call. A Tokyo client emailed to say they missed his voice. German VP he hadn't spoken to in months asked if he was still freelance. He responded to each one the same way, a quiet hello, a reminder that discretion was guaranteed, and a file name proposal, RC Global Vone PDF. Back in the glass box that passed for Orbit Tech HQ, Desmond was unraveling. He stormed into HR like a Wall Street cliché in a B-movie, tie loose. Pupils dilated. We need to shut him down. Now your HR analyst, fresh from grad school, still believing in systems, asked what grounds they had. He's breaching contract. Desmond barked. He's working with former clients. That's IP theft or something. But the analyst scrolled through his screen, confused. His termination paperwork's not here. What? There's no final separation filed. He was removed from payroll. Yes. But no formal exit documents, no signed NDA, no non-compete initialized, nothing uploaded to the compliance tracker. It's all marked pending. Desmond's face drained of color. You're telling me, he said slowly, that we fired him, but never finished firing him. I think the assumption was that you were handling it personally, since it was a strategic leadership decision. Desmond spun away before he could finish, muttering profanities under his breath. By 6:00 p.m., legal was looped in. By 8:00 p.m. confirmed the worst. Elias had no enforceable non-compete, no confidentiality clause tied to his exit, nothing preventing his from contacting clients, advising, even reusing his own materials. And the best part, he knew it because in his final days at Orbis Tech, long before Desmond decided to nuke his in a boardroom power play, he had requested a contract audit from HR, citing title change confusion. He had the emails, the metadata, the proof that they knew, and now he was weaponizing it quietly, elegantly, like silk pulled through skin. By Friday, 3 more clients had gone dark. By the following week, whispers inside Orbis Tech turned into murmurs, murmurs into panic. Project managers were left holding half-translated contracts. Product leads were ghosted mid-up employment. Junior account exec started crying in the bathroom after his Korean client demanded to speak to Mr. Thorne or no one at all. Desmond tried to spin it in the Monday leadership sink. Look, there's a vacuum right now. These clients are just confused. They'll come back, but no one believed it, because Elias wasn't just winning, he was erasing them. The email came through encrypted Proton Mail at 2:47 a.m., tagged re-urgent in all caps. A burner address that only existed for the hour it took his to open, and read it. Subject: They're coming after you. I thought you should know. Elias tapped the screen slowly, eyes scanning the message in the blue glow of his Singapore apartment's bedroom. The Marina Bay skyline glimmered through the window behind his, but his attention was locked on one line from the anonymous tipster. Legal's drafting a retroactive non-compete. Desmond's pushing for backdated enforcement, wants to frame your client contact as corporate sabotage. He stared at the words for a long time. Then he smiled. It wasn't joy. It wasn't surprise. It was the smile of a chess player who realizes their opponent is about to walk directly into a checkmate because they forgot they moved first. Elias closed the email, stood up, and padded barefoot to the home office across the hall. He powered up the sleek custom-rigged tower he used for sensitive work. No cloud, no logs, just raw local firepower and a mirrored backup drive locked in a hidden drawer. From a labeled folder titled Orbit Contractual Term Rest Revisions, he opened a PDF dated 6 weeks before his termination. It was an internal compliance request. To HR at Orbtech Corp. From Elias Thorne at Orbes Corp. Subject: confirmation of contract update following title adjustment. The message was polite. Meticulous had asked for documentation regarding his contract obligations after his VP title was restructured under Desmond's strategic vision. HR had promised to follow up. They never had. A week later, he followed up again and again. 3 emails, 1 official Slack ping, all saved, all time-stamped, no NDA, no non-compete, no addendum filed. And then came the nuclear core, a CC'd message from Desmond himself, 2 days before the negotiation implosion, saying, I'll take care of Elias's exit. We don't need to waste legal's time. Just cut his access. It was overreach. Corporate vanity dressed in efficiency, and it was fatal. He zipped everything into an encrypted archive and attached it to an email. To Alina Basha, Attorney Corporate Defense, subject: potential escalation. Please review attached. The second email took longer to draft. Natalie Hong at Business Week until calm subject. Orbd's quiet collapse for your eyes. Only Natalie Hang had reached out months ago, back when Elias was still at Orbistech. He'd been sniffing around layoffs, missed targets, questionable back-channel deals. Elias had politely declined to speak then. Now was different. Now he wasn't protecting anything, he was clearing the runway. The email was surgical, not bitter, not dramatic. Just a breadcrumb trail of receipts, dates, threads, actions taken, red flags ignored. He mentioned that an internal audit had been quietly requested by several shareholders regarding strategic miscommunication in a PAC. He included one line at the bottom. "If you'd like to see what a weaponized oversight looks like, call me." Then he closed the laptop, walked into the kitchen, and poured himself a glass of still water with a twist of lime. He didn't toast. He didn't post anything cryptic on social media. This wasn't a victory lap. This was positioning. Later that morning, Alina called. His voice was sharp, dry, surgical. "They're bluffing," he said. "Desmond's legal threat would evaporate in discovery. We have documented intent, failure to execute, and demonstrable harm if they try to retroactively pin this on you." "Good," Elias said. "But I don't want them to back off. Silence. Then what do you want?" "I want them exposed. I want this mess named. I want every investor who backed Desmond's so-called vision to see what it bought them." There was a pause. Then Alina's voice shifted into the cold hum of compliance machinery. "Understood." By the end of the day, Natalie Hang responded, "I've heard rumors, but this is smoke with a bonfire underneath. I'd like to meet off the record for now." Elias leaned back in his chair, crossed one leg over the other, and stared out at the late afternoon skyline, its glow bleeding into the horizon like a match held to paper. Let them come. Let them draft their desperate legal memos, their boardroom lies, their late-night PR spin. He'd already prepared the blade, and now they were walking toward it. The press didn't scream, it whispered. Started with a 5-line blurb buried in the international business section of the Straits Times. Kuro Tech has entered into a strategic partnership with a boutique consultancy based in Singapore. Sources close to the matter say the firm will oversee Kuro's Asia-Pacific integration strategies moving forward. No name, no logo, no direct mention of Orbistech. But insiders knew when RC Global's IP address pinged on 3 different data rooms that used to belong to Orbistech. They knew when Zoo's procurement team issued a blanket cancellation of all pending license renewals. They knew when the legal department at Orbistech received a 7-word reply from Zoo COO. "We are moving in a different direction." By noon, the whispers reached New York. By 4:00 p.m., Orbit tech stock had dipped 6%. Low volume but sharp twitch in the bloodstream, enough to catch the eye of traders trained to smell blood under the perfume of quarterly optimism. On Slack, Orbis text channels were ghost towns. No client updates, no wins. One post simply read, "Does anyone know where Laura Beasley is?" No one replied. At 6:19 p.m., Businessweek published an article. Title, "Orbit Tech in Transition. What's behind the Kuro disengagement?" It was soft, careful kind of story that doesn't burn the house, just flicks a lit match at the curtain. But halfway down, buried in the context paragraph, was the first crack of thunder. Sources familiar with the deal suggest Zoo's new advisory partner includes former Orbit Tech executive Elias Thorne. Elias was in Jakarta when it dropped, waiting in a quiet tea salon tucked behind a rooftop co-working space. His assistant showed his the article on an iPad. He didn't flinch and smile. He simply sipped his jasmine tea and asked, "Have they issued a response?" "Not yet," the assistant said. Elias nodded once. "They will." Across the ocean, panic bloomed inside Orbis Tech like a gas leak. Desmond paced outside the glass walls of the executive suite, barking into a phone, sweating through a monogrammed dress shirt. "We need a statement, a denial, something, anything." But legal stalled, PR ghosted, and investors started calling. The dip had turned into a slide, 9% by morning. Not catastrophic, but sharp enough to rattle the board. Shareholder chats lit up with phrases like negligence and structural incompetence. That afternoon, Elias's phone rang. "Private number, old ringtone," he answered. "Elias, it's Martin." Martin, leaving early investor, founding board member and tour from his early days in San Francisco when he was still doing 15-hour strategy decks and drinking gas station coffee for dinner. "Didn't expect to hear from you," he said. "You always knew when to keep your powder dry," he said. "I respected that." There was a pause, wind noise on his end. Then, with the gravity of a man who'd seen too many balance sheets bled out by ego, "Can we meet?" He didn't ask why. He simply said, "Singapore or Hong Kong?" "Hong Kong, quiet place." "No reporters tomorrow, I'll send the plane." They hung up without goodbye. Later that night, Elias walked the length of Clark Quay alone, the city humming soft and humid around him. He passed glowing billboards pushing Orbis Tech's latest AI rollout. Seamless futures powered by us. But the image felt brittle now, like a mask melting in the heat. He wasn't dancing yet. He hadn't uncorked champagne or written his final line, because the climax wasn't a headline, not yet. It was a meeting, a hand extended in private, and a chance to aim higher than he ever could from within the gilded cage of Orbis. Desmond's hand shook as he flipped through the printed NDA packet. Dozens of pages, legally dense, all bearing the same curious line buried deep in the boilerplate. RC Global Partners Limited may be consulted independently for strategic oversight, subject to mutual confidentiality. It was there in black and white in contracts signed 2-3 months ago, dated after Elias's firing, filed by former Orbis Tech clients, now officially ex-clients. And worse, most of the documents had been sent to Orbis Tech's own compliance team as a courtesy. Desmond slammed the folder shut and barked at his executive assistant. "Get me a call with legal right now." But legal was already on with Martin leaving. Desmond stormed into the shareholder meeting 2 days later like a man expecting a mutiny but still hoping he could bluff through it. "Before we begin," he said, trying to smile, "I want to address some noise that's been circulating. There have been unsubstantiated claims about client relationships, specifically involving a former employee." "Let me be clear. You mean Elias Thorne?" Someone interrupted flatly from the back. Desmond froze. Eyes scanned the room. Investors, board members, senior stakeholders. Not a single ally in sight. "He's working with our largest former accounts," he said, voice tightening. "He's violated the spirit, if not the letter, of his exit agreement." Martin cleared his throat. Desmond turned, his posture shifting like a kicked dog. "Martin, I was just about to." "No, you weren't." Martin stood slowly. "You were about to spin it." He pulled out a leather folder, unbuttoned it, handed a stack of documents to the general counsel, seated at the head of the table. "Emails," Martin said, "from you confirming you'd handle his exit personally. No HR involvement, no contract finalization, no legal oversight. You fired him mid-contract without process, and now you're blaming his for walking out of a door you left wide open." Desmond's mouth parted. No words coming out, just that soft, static silence that falls when a man realizes his spotlight is no longer a stage, it's a heat lamp. Another board member flipped through the documents. "He was never bound by a non-compete," he said. Martin nodded. "And his firm is doing precisely what we used to hire his for, only better and for more clients." Desmond tried to recover. "So what? We just let his dismantle us from the outside." "No," Martin said. "We ask how he did it. Why we let you run things straight into the ground while he quietly ate your lunch." Silence. Then softly, "He's agreed to testify at the ethics review." "Next week," Martin added voluntarily. A ripple moved through the room. Desmond's face cracked, panic creeping in under the lacquered smugness. "You talked to his?" he asked. "You reached out to his personally?" Martin didn't answer him. He looked to the others. He's calm, focused, uninterested in revenge, fully prepared to clarify what he experienced here. What we all missed while chasing quarterly illusions and inflated leadership resumes. Desmond looked like he'd been exiled from his own body. Later that evening, a junior board liaison reached out to Elias with a quiet offer, a high six-figure settlement, if he would agree to sign an NDA and walk away from the ethics review. He declined in 2 sentences. "I'm not looking for money. I'm looking for truth. See you Tuesday." He didn't CC his lawyer. He didn't BCC the press. He didn't need to. This wasn't scorched earth. This was clean air, and he was finally breathing it. It dropped at 7 a.m. Singapore time. The headline was surgical, precise, bloodless, and terminal. Implosion at Orbis Tech. Insider accounts reveal chaos, cover-ups, and one consultant's quiet coup. Byline: Natalie Hang, 10,000 words, names, dates, memos, screenshots. Elias's name appeared for the first time in public as the founder of RC Global Partners Limited, the boutique consultancy quietly absorbing Orbis Tech's Asia-Pacific portfolio, one contract at a time. The story traced everything. The silent exits, the client migrations, the missing paperwork, the weaponized incompetence. Desmond's public firing stunt immortalized in a subheading: strategic restructuring or executive ego. Within 2 hours, article trended on LinkedIn, Bloomberg, and Twitter. By noon in New York, Orbis Tech stock had dropped 18%. Trading halted by afternoon. The quarterly earnings call scheduled for 9 a.m. Eastern was already dead before it began. The call opened with static, then a voice. Someone from investor relations trying to spin a narrative of unexpected headwinds and client realignments. But every analyst on the line had already read the expos. A one was buying the script anymore. And Elias, he wasn't listening. He was sitting in a glass conference room, 47 stories above Raffles Place, sunlight bleeding across the marble table, Singapore humming below his like a heartbeat. Across from his on a crisp, lag-free video call sat Jews. North American expansion team flanked by legal operations and translation. He didn't need the translator. We're thrilled to finalize this agreement. Man on the other side smiled and replied in Mandarin. It's not every day we get to say we're closing the largest logistics integration deal in our company's history. The numbers were staggering, nearly triple the size of the original Orbis Tech deal. 3 regions, multi-currencies, multi-year, full strategic control delegated to RC Global. No middlemen, no weak links, no Desmond. His assistant entered silently, setting a tablet beside him. On screen, a live graph showing Orbis Tech's market cap bleeding red across the hour. A push notification blinked at the top. Desmond Vance placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Elias tapped it closed without reading further. He looked back at the call, calm, measured, certain. I'll begin implementation next week, he said. You'll have my full team, direct lines, no bottlenecks. He paused, then tilted his head slightly, and this time we do it right. Team on the other end nodded. Papers shuffled. A contract was lifted and shown to camera. The final clause was read aloud. He leaned forward, scanned it one last time, and signed. The call ended with polite farewells and muted applause. He stayed seated, alone now in the center of the high-rise, quiet, surrounded by clean glass and still air. He exhaled, not relief, not victory, just truth. No title, no office politics. No man to frame his success as his idea, just his name, his clients, his rules. From below, the city moved on. Buses and bikes and heat and breath, all pulsing beneath the tower, like a world he no longer had to fight to belong to. He picked up his phone, opened his calendar, and scheduled his next boardroom for Tuesday. Then he smiled. Let's begin. Thanks for joining the fun, you office survivors. Subscribe for more switch-flicking drama. Let's make your former coworker sweat. The documents lay on the table, a silent testament to their negligence. The merger was hanging by a thread, fragile as spun glass. He adjusted his tie, the fabric feeling like a noose around his neck. Loyalty was a currency rarely traded on this floor. Information was power. And right now he held all the cards. 0 more times he thought about it.